In this video, I want to address the question, can I learn classical guitar on a steel string acoustic? So these are two different instruments. They're both acoustic guitars, but this is a steel string acoustic with steel strings specifically on the first, second, and third string. And this is a nylon string. We have clear nylon on the first, second, and third string, and then silk wound with steel on the outside on the basses. They sound different, they look different, they feel different. But we can still play classical guitar music on the steel string acoustic. So it has strengths and weaknesses. Both guitars do, as everything does. So let's explore a few of those aspects as we're trying to solve the question, should you be using a nylon string guitar to learn classical, or can you use a steel string? I'll start with the steel string because I think many of you watching this channel will be familiar with the nylon string already. The construction is different, the materials are different, the way the guitar feels is different, but in the end we still can play with pretty much the same technique. I'm using a footstool under my left leg to raise the guitar angle up. We have a raised neck in classical guitar technique, so we get good access to the strings for complex fingerings without putting any strain on the wrist. You will find some classical guitarists that sit sort of side saddle like this, very common with steel string techniques. Ricardo Gallen, flamenco players often have this approach to the instrument, but in general I would recommend raising your left leg and having this more classical sitting position because of the complexity of what we do on the fingerboard. Some things will be advantageous on the steel string. The fingerboard is actually thinner, so the distance between the strings is going to be a bit closer, and if you have small hands or if that just is appealing to you, that's going to be an advantage. On the other hand, if we're doing more complex movements between each string with a lot of detailed figurations, maybe the strings feel too cramped. Actually, you need a bit more space, and that's what you'll find on the nylon string, more space between the strings, which perhaps is a benefit when we're playing complex music. The big one is the steel strings on the right hand. If you have nails on the right hand, playing classical technique might chew up your nails. So I am lucky that I have thick nails that don't get too affected by playing the steel strings. You can also get a nice tone. Similar tonal principles apply. Get a lot of sustain on these steel strings. However, I think the balance of the sound of the strings is not quite the same as the nylon. So, for instance, if you hear the upper voices, the upper strings, they're very clear, very shimmery, lots of sustain. However, the bass notes are not as clear, they're not as balanced as that top voice. I mean, I have to say these strings are a little bit dead on this steel string. But in general, the voicing, the balance of the strings on a classical, on a nylon, is that much better. Much more of a conversation going on there in the music. And so, in terms of what suits the music, I think the nylon string guitar really is superior in that regard, because the music we have often has voices, melodic voices, bass voices, middle voices, and we can really bring those out on the nylon string guitar. So too, in my opinion, for tone. That suppleness, that singing quality, gentle quality, is really particular to the classical guitar. It doesn't have as much sustain, but honestly, I think the biggest reason many of us come to classical guitar is because of the sound quality. Of those chords, the sonority of the strings. really is something very particular to this instrument. So where does the steel string then shine? Well, in another kind of musical genre, the guitar starts to activate and sound much more robust in a really beautiful way. So if we have this very fiddly, very very delicate, we'll say, intricate patterns that sort of get a little swallowed by the voice of this guitar, where does this guitar start to sing? Well, it's when we reach a threshold of vibration. Strumming really opens up the sound of this guitar and many steel strings, and also sort of fingerstyle Travis picking arpeggiated figures over chords is really effective on these guitars as well. This is an orchestra model. You may be familiar with this from, let's say, the Eric Clapton Unplugged album, where he played Tears in Heaven, a really beautiful song. But of course there are many different models of steel strings. That's a bit of a difference as well to the nylon string. You'll get orchestra models, you get triple O's, you get parlor guitars, which get smaller, dreadnoughts used in bluegrass, which are very big, and all sorts of different variations in between. This one has the 12th fret here. So I constantly, if I switch between the two guitars, I start to always go to the wrong fret, because I always feel like the body of the guitar meets the 12th fret, as it does on almost every classical I've ever played. So if I want to do an arpeggio, that's sort of where my muscle memory takes me, a bit out of place. So there's a little bit of a learning curve to go between the instruments. What else? I mean, the bottom line is that you can play classical music on a steel string guitar, and if that's what you have available, then you can absolutely go for it. The difficulty lies in that the steel strings are a bit heavier on the left hand, and they're also a bit harsher on the right hand nail. So that makes things a bit more difficult, I'd say. Sustain is actually a bit easier. But a lot of other things are a bit heavier on the hand. So as a generalized suggestion, if you have that question of, I want to learn classical, but I only have a steel string acoustic, absolutely go for it. But if you really start getting excited and enthusiastic about classical guitar playing and classical guitar repertoire, I would say as soon as possible, move across to the nylon string instrument. There's new tone worlds to explore there. It's going to be easier on your left and right hand. And the guitar is suited to the music with its balance of voices and tonal range. So let me know what your experience is playing classical music on the acoustic. Maybe you've never tried, maybe that's all you do. So let me know what your experience is so we can share our thoughts with the rest of the community.
Rolling.
Alright YouTube, I'm quitting classical guitar and I'm becoming a jazz man.